Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barb Tyson hosting another great Salty Dog webinar. Joining us today is David Flynn from Quantum Sales, presenting Trim for Control. Thanks for being here, Dave. And before we get started, I'm going to ask everyone to keep your video off and to keep muted. But go ahead and type your questions in the chat box that I've opened. We do record all Salty Dog webinars, and I'll send out a link as soon as we have it ready. And now I'm going to hand things over to Hank George. Okay, Hank.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this. I think you'll find it amazingly informative, and the recording will help you go back for things that maybe you missed and want to refresh. But I first wanted to say that Quantum has been a partner with the Salty Dogs since we started, essentially, and we've now entered a new mode. We have an agreement to where the Salty Dogs have designated Quantum as the official sailmaker of the Salty Dogs Sailing Association. And with that, members get substantial benefits. And just in brief, you can get free sail inspections, free advice consulting anytime you're thinking of doing something with sales. You can just give Quantum a call. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And also 20% discount on new sales or sale repairs. So for any of this, the point of contact for the Salty Dogs is Dave Flynn, but the services can be at any Quantum loft around the world. But if you want to take advantage of any of that, get in touch with Dave and he'll set things up and make it happen, or go see him directly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex for introductions and get this going. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hank. Well, I'm really excited to have Dave talk today. You know, having just done a transatlantic, and while we weren't racing, I think we pushed the boat pretty hard and really tried to sail her to its its maximum. So I think a discussion today about just that, how to get the most out of the boat that you have and the most out of the sails, is something that I think we'll all find very useful as we get into the heart of the sailing season. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave and take it away.
Great. Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for spending your Tuesday afternoon with me. I hope it's a rainy, miserable one where you are, so that you don't feel like you should be outside. And thanks for those kind words, Hank. Quantum is proud to be part of the team. And yeah, I'm available anytime. You guys have questions or problems, shoot me an email, give me a call. I'll give you my 2 cents. If I don't know the answer, I can probably know where to find it. So today's talk is actually one I enjoyed doing. I've done this many times before. It's about proper sail trim, but this is not from the perspective that I usually deal with it from. So I've spent almost all my adult life trying to make a sailboat go, a tenth of a knot faster, or a couple of hundreds even is a big deal in a one design racing fleet. If you can be a boat length and a half or 2 boat lengths faster over the course of a 2-mile beat, that makes the whole race a much easier affair to do well at. But this is not about that. This is about normal people like us who go cruising, and we don't need to get there 10 minutes faster, but what we do need to do is to stay under control. So the fact that instead of having the boat sail us, we're sailing the boat and we feel comfortable with it. A lot of this is just all about balance. A sailboat basically needs X amount of power, and once you get X plus that amount of power, bad things start to happen. In a monohull like this classic one pictured here, it feels great to have the rail down in the water and the bone in her teeth and all that stuff. But as a boat heels over too far, a monohull heels over too far, some bad things happen, most notably weather helm, and it's telling us essentially that we have too much horsepower. So this is about certainly controlling the amount of horsepower we bring to bear. It's kind of like the analogy is going out in really cold weather. if you've got the right clothing and stuff on and you're set up for it, it really is not that bad. But if you don't, then you've got a problem. So multi-hulls get overpowered too, by the way. And I know a lot of you probably have multi-hulls. They come in two flavors. This is a high performance multi-hull. It's a cruising one, but notice that whole hull getting out of the water. That's a sign that it's a performance multi-hull. And if you let that hull get too far out of the water, it's the same as going over too far. Bad things are going to happen. In this case, the leeward bow is going to dig in and you're going to crash or round down or do something that you don't want to do. Most of us are not sailing boats like this cruising multi-hull. My cruising future has one in there, but this is a more typical multi-hull, a displacement multi-hull where both hulls stay flat. It probably doesn't have dagger boards, and so it's somewhat limited in its ability to go upwind. But as we talk about all these trim deals, I'll try to make some specific reference to really the three kinds of boats that we actually all sail, because they're a little bit different. Fortunately, most trim routines and rules, cover all bases. So the first thing I want to emphasize, and this has a huge impact when you start actually sailing offshore and start sailing in bigger breezes, is that the sails steer the boat. I don't know how many of you out there have sailed small boats. Hopefully you have, and if you haven't, you should try, because small boats teach you instantaneously. If you don't ease the sheets in a big puff, you go swimming, right? If you try to bear off and don't ease the main sheet, the boat doesn't bear off. So when you get on a bigger boat, even a huge one like this is 146 feet long, and it's, all push button and powered and cool and all the rest of it. But when it gets windy, the same things that happen in a small boat start to happen here, just on a much bigger, more dangerous scale. So it's important to remember that, if you want to bear away and it's windy, the sails have to be able to ease out. You're not going to overcome with the rudder the much larger forces the sail plan are generating. And likewise, if you want to head up, it's really better to do it just by trimming the sails in, as opposed to relying on the rudder so much. The rudder is kind of a fine-tune trim control. The sails are the gross tune. And so as you learn to manage your boat and control it in more breeze, this is the fundamental principle to keep in mind. You got to adjust the sails if you want to turn. So we're going to talk about going upwind and downwind, and also reaching a little bit. But when we talk about going upwind and downwind, we'll introduce this concept of VMG, velocity made good. And this is not the velocity made good that you're used to seeing on your GPS. Your velocity made good towards where the mark you put in. That's not this. When we're going upwind, VMG is how fast are we going, what percentage of that speed are we really going straight upwind, and likewise downwind. When we talk about offwind sailing, we'll talk about maximizing power generally, because we'll usually need it, but we'll also talk a little bit about what happens when we're overpowered. We'll talk about maintaining stability. A boat that is rocking and rolling and swinging back and forth is not all that much fun. So how do we stabilize things? And at all times, we want to control the amount of heel, and really more than heel, the amount of helm. Helm is what is our telling factor if we're overpowering the boat, multi-hull or monohull alike. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of VMG. And we'll keep all this theory on the front end, and we'll keep it simple. And after that, we'll get to the nuts and bolts. But here's a good concept to think about. If I'm trying to sail upwind, or in this case, the wind's coming from the top of the slide down, I've got some choices in how I approach the problem. Of course, the logical thing is, wow, I want to go there. I'll just point the boat straight upwind. But that doesn't work very well, right? The boat just goes into irons and sits there and doesn't move. As I bear off and fill the sails in, the boat now starts moving, and I get speed up. But I may not be sailing as close to the wind as I can. This boat here on the right-hand side is doing what's called footing, or reaching a little bit. So it's got great speed, but it's not going up the blackboard very fast because it's got very wide angles. the flip side to that equation is the pincher, the one who tries to sail too close to the wind. And you end up going high, but slow. And the boat actually ends up going sideways for reasons we'll talk about in a little bit. So there is a sweet spot. As there is in everything in life, there is a middle way. And one of our goals upwind is to find the balance between going too fast, being a footer, and trying to sail close and being a pincher. And there is a golden rule in sail trim when you're trying to sail upwind anyway, and that is you want to have speed first, and then you want to try to point. Because here's the problem. When we go upwind, we're trying to make our boat do an unnatural act. Most of the force, that's called lift in aerodynamic terms, when we have our sails sheeted in close to the center line of the boat, that force is all sideways. So the only thing that resists that force is what we have underneath the water, our keel. And that's why boats with no keels, like displacement catamarans, don't go upwind very well. And don't let any boat broker ever kid you that draft is not an important function. Yes, it makes it more difficult to get into the Bahamas. And we can get away with 5 or 6 foot draft on our 45-foot boat, and we can make it work. But it's not very efficient, right? When you take away that depth, it makes the lift that the keel generates all the less. And so as water flows around both sides of a keel, you effectively get a low pressure system on the windward side of the keel, and there's a higher pressure system on the backside. The water actually ends up running much faster around the weather side of the keel. And that pressure differential is what's called lift. And it's that suction of pulling you to weather that takes that lift from the sails and counterbalances it and allows you to go forward. But if you take keel away and you take lift away, you tend to go sideways more, and there's just no substitute. So a 40-foot racing boat draws 10 feet, right, to go upwind efficiently. So if you chop 4 feet of that off, you've got to recognize that you're not going to have quite as efficient an animal, and it's going to be harder to go upwind. And one of the keys here is to get whatever keel you have working, you have to have water flowing past it. And if you try to just pinch or sail too close to the wind and the boat slows down, then the flow of water past the keel slows down, and the pressure differential from side to side is reduced. And so the overall amount of lift is reduced, not as much there to counteract the sails, and the boat goes sideways. So one of the principles as we look at sail trim controls, the strings, is speed first when you're trying to sail upwind, then worry about height or pointing. Because if you don't get water moving past the keel, she no work. So the last little theoretical concept we'll introduce to you here is just full versus flat. As we talk about the sail trim controls and developing power or depowering them, fuller sails create more power. And so anything we do that increases the depth in the sail, this dimension across here in the top sail, that creates horsepower. And sometimes horsepower is good. Downwind, reaching, light air upwind, fuller sails are great. But as soon as we start having control issues and heel and weather helm issues, we want to be able to flatten the sails out. So as we talk about sail trim controls, we'll talk about taking sails from full to flat. So why do we need to adjust anything? I mean, I've gotten on many of your boats before, to put sails on and go do sail checks. And those sails the halyard has been neatly coiled into this perfect pile and stuffed on a cleat at the mast, and it hasn't been touched since that sail was put up. Well, unfortunately, sails are dynamic things. They move and stretch. And so just to keep them sort of where we started, I've got to do some pulling to resist the change in shape as they get loaded up. They're going to stretch no matter what you make them out of. We can sell you sails made out of carbon and unobtainium, and they're still going to move somewhat, and you're still going to have to make some adjustments just to keep the shapes as designed. And more importantly, you got to make changes in sail adjustment just for what angle am I sailing to the wind? Do I need the sail to be flatter to depower it? Do I need it to be fuller to power it up? So there's no getting around the fact that this is not a power boat, and that the engine here, the sails, need to be moved around a little bit so we can sort of optimize what they're capable of doing. So that's the framework we'll look at things in. These are triangles controlled by strings. They're not all that complicated. This is not like tuning a Stradivarius violin. You don't have to have some special sense or things like that. You just have to understand what each of the primary controls does. And for the headsail, we have, most importantly, the sheet. That sheet runs through a block, so there's a lead position that'll be a factor. We have tension along the luff of the sail as controlled by the halyard. That's an important one. We might have a backstay adjuster. You multi-hull guys can just skip all this part. You guys don't have backstay adjusters. But for those monohulls who do, that can be a control line for you. Almost all of us use furling. So at some point we need to talk about partially furling and things like that. But the most important thing, that if you start with nothing else, you got to know what to do with the sheet. And so what was the rule of thumb you've probably, when you first got sailing lessons and you went out with an instructor or somebody who was showing you how to do it, and the boat was reaching along and you're just, on a beam reach going somewhere? What the classic rule of sail trim was simple. You let the sail out till it luffed by showing back winding on the front of the sail, and trimmed it just enough to stop it from luffing. When in doubt, let it out is the old rule of thumb. And that is still totally viable whenever you're reaching and sailing at broad angles, down off the wind. The typical problem with most sailors is that they overtrim. Pulling the sails in does not make the sail more powerful. Easing it out as far as possible so as if it is at the correct angle to the wind and actually gets air flowing over both sides of it, that's the trick. So the rule of sheet tension when you're reaching, let it out till it luffs, trim it in an inch. But what happens if you want to optimize your upwind VMG? You want to sail as close to the wind as possible. You want to make your cruising boat do that unnatural act that it's really not designed all that well for. Well, then the game becomes, how close can I sheet before I stop the boat from going forward? Because the harder I pull those sails in, the closer to the center line they become, the closer I can sail to the wind without the sail luffing, but the more the forces are all sideways. And I'm now putting a big load and strain on the keel. And so as I trim a sail in for upwind work, if I've got an overlapping sail, I'm probably looking at the distance between the leech of the sail and the spreader. If it's non-overlapping, it'll actually tuck inside the spreader and I'll see where the leech is pointed at the spreader. But I'm looking up. Here's another golden rule of sail trim. Watch what you're pulling on. The winch is not going to tell you anything. Don't get your fingers in it, but when you're pulling on the sheet, you should be looking up at the sail to see how far it needs to go. And when I'm looking at upwind settings, I'm looking at this distance of the sail off the spreader. And it's going to change as a function of breeze velocity. So in light air, I just can't pull the sail in nearly as far as I can in medium conditions where once the boat's going well, I might be able to trim quite hard. And figuring out where that sweet spot is on your boat is going to be a variable that you'll learn over time. And you'll start with it off because you want speed first, right? And let's say you'll start with it a foot off the spreader and you get the boat going well, let's see how hard I can crank it in. And I'll gradually wind it in till, hey, on some cruising boats with pretty wide spreaders, I can almost touch the spreader on the upwind leg. So striking the right balance between having the sail too far out and too far in is the key to upwind sail performance. And it's going to change a little bit. Off and lighter breeze, tighter and medium breeze. And when we talk about depowering the sail, maybe even off again in big breeze to spill some power out of the sail. But sheet tension is the key. The other thing that happens when I'm sailing upwind is, unfortunately, steering becomes important. Because On a reach, I kind of just point the boat where I want it to go, and I let the sail tail loft and I trim it back in an inch. But if I want to try to struggle to make the boat go upwind, and I've got the sail wound in as far as I can, now it really is incumbent upon the helmsperson to keep the boat in that narrow groove of not too high and not too low. And this is where telltales are a huge help. And on most sails, you should have 3 sets of telltales, up the luff at roughly equal intervals, and hopefully you can see them when you're driving. One of the other downsides of our cruising boats is that we maximize the cockpit space based on how big the table can be, and how much stuff can we get in there, and we tend to push the helm way far back, and it often makes it darn near impossible to see these telltales. And then we compound the problem by putting lots of canvas in the way, and suddenly there's no way we can sail upwind. So it's very difficult to sail upwind effectively without being able to see the telltales, and unfortunately without hand steering, which is much more efficient. Off the wind, autopilots are great. Upwind, if they're tied into the apparent wind angle, they can be reasonable, but you're never going to do as well as a human being can do by watching the telltales. And if you look at the telltales, and they're both, as it is in the sort of the bottom example, streaming straight aft, that's good. That's full power. That means air is flowing around both sides of the sail. If I look and the inside telltale is in the top one, the red one in this case, is lifting, that means I'm getting very close to trying to sail too close to the wind. And I need to bear off a little bit to level those out. If I get the outside telltales drooping or not there, then I'm way too far off the wind and I need to come up. Usually when you steer, you ride the inside telltale. You make sure the outside one's always going and the inside one is just on the verge of lifting up. In light air, I probably let it stream straight aft. In a little bit more breeze, I can actually let it lift. So telltales, big advantage if I'm trying to optimize upwind performance. Another thing happens on the way to sailing upwind, before I get to halyard tension, I'll go back here. There's an important technique in steering that you need to learn. When you're trying to sail upwind, watching telltales is great up to a certain point. But if you keep following the telltales as the breeze increases, the boat's going to start to heel too far. It's going to start to generate too much power. And as it starts to heel, you'll get weather helm, and the boat will try to correct that by turning upwind and flattening itself out. And if you get too much weather helm and continue to fight the wheel, you're basically dragging the rudder sideways through the water. And that's not particularly efficient either. So as it gets breezier, you can use the telltales in light to moderate conditions to get sort of maximum power out of the sails. But as it gets windier, you can simply start steering by the angle of heel. And instead of fighting the boat when you get a puff, you let the boat just come up a little bit. The inside telltale will lift. It will be dancing. It will be feathering is the term that's used. And that inside telltale, you don't care about it anymore because I've got X amount of horsepower. I don't need any more. So I can let the sail almost luff a little bit at the front end in the puffs, and that's okay. So once it gets breezy enough, do I have full power and I'm heeling too much, I start steering by angle of heel. And I don't worry if the telltales are streaming straight aft. And in the puffs, I let the boat come up. And in the lulls, I press it down a little bit so I maintain a constant angle. And what you'll see in a well-sailed boat sailing upwind is a constant angle of heel. So that's how the driver sort of impacts the whole equation here. Because once the sail's sheeted all the way in, we're in the driver's hands. There's a couple other strings that have an impact on what the sails look like here. And the simplest one to work with is the halyard. It controls the tension. You pull up to control the tension along the leading edge of the sail. And if you look at the sail in this photo, you can see the horizontal wrinkles perpendicular to the luff of that sail. That's a sign of insufficient luff tension, which in light air isn't a problem and maybe is even desirable. But as the breeze picks up a little bit and I want to make sure the sail stays depowered, then I need to add halyard tension to smooth these wrinkles out. And this is a function of how much halyard you need is a function of apparent wind velocity. So even on the same day with the same wind strength, if I'm going downwind, I have much less apparent wind velocity than I do if I turn the boat upwind and go on the wind. So I may need more halyard tension to sail upwind and less to sail downwind. In a way, you can always look at this luff though. And whenever I've got the halyard in my hand and I'm watching what I'm pulling on, I'm watching for those wrinkles. I'll ease till I get them and take up just enough to smooth them out. And don't fight the sail when you're doing it. When you're trying to add halyard tension, make sure you ease the sheet so the sail luffs and it's easy to put the tension on and then put the sheet back on. But the halyard has a big impact on the overall shape of the sail. And if you're not adjusting it, you're tying your hands behind your back. If you let these wrinkles generate, the sail gets fuller and more powerful just when you want to flatten it out and pull the shape forward. So that's halyard tension, and it's the same on any boat you ever sail on. Luff tension on a maxi boat, 80 footer is the same as luff tension on a Catalina 25, and it's controlled the same way. The next thing that you need to look at is how your lead is set, or how does the headsail sheet run relative to the block it goes through. And so when you look at a sail, the position of that block, the sheet pulls both down and it also pulls back. And as with all things in sail trim, I need to find the right balance between pulling down and pulling back. I need to find that middle thing where I kind of have even tension on both. If I pull the lead too far back, I'm flattening the foot of the sail like crazy. Like in this left-hand drawing, you see how flat the foot of the sail is, but I'm not pulling down at all. And so the top of the sail tends to twist or spill open, and it'll be quite far off the rig. If I pull the lead too far forward, then the foot gets real round, and then the top comes in of the sail comes into the rig very quickly and closes off. So somehow I got to strike a balance for that, so that when I am sailing upwind and I sheet the sail in, just as the sail's foot kind of kisses the shrouds at the bottom, the top of the sail is getting to be where it's a couple of inches off the top spreader. That's a good balance point. Moving the lead forward does increase the power of the sail. So when you ease the sheet, like when you're reaching, typically the lead will go forward as well. You can adjust the lead in a whole bunch of different ways. One of the ways is you can use your telltales. If you, as in the top example, are seeing that the bottom set of telltales is, as you head up, is luffing, and the top ones still look great, that means your lead's too far forward and it needs to go aft. If all three are breaking nice and evenly from top to bottom, then the lead's good. And then if it's too far aft, then the top of the sail will luff long before the bottom. So you can use the telltales to sort of refine this lead position thing. So you can look at the distance of the sail off the spreaders and off the shrouds, and you can also look at it as a function of telltales. And here's a simple way to look at it. This sheet, as it goes up through the clew of the sail, should basically bisect the clew, and if you kept following that thing up, it would hit the middle of the luff. That's showing you've got a pretty good balance between the two. One way to depower the boat, actually, is to go ahead and let the foot of the sail get really flat. So if I wanted to depower a headsail, one of the things I can do is let this lead drop back a little bit, 6 inches a foot. That flattens the bottom, it depowers it, and it actually lets the top open and twist off. So I spill a little bit of air out of the top, and that helps the whole sail depower. Typically, if you're struggling to control the mainsail luffing all the time to keep the boat on its feet, it's time to depower the genoa. It's time to drop the lead back and twist the sail off and open it up a little bit so the two sails are more balanced. The other important thing to remember about leads is they definitely change when you start to reach. And hopefully, as cruising sailors, we're reaching a lot. We're avoiding this whole upwind portion of the program as much as possible. In these pictures, you can see the use of a second sheet. And this is the same for monohulls or multi-hulls. Multi-hulls just have a lot more room to do it. That where the second sheet is outboard and forward. Because what happens is as you ease that sail out, the clue stays in one place. And now I'm easing it, it's moving away from that lead, moving away from the lead. I'm no longer pulling down anymore. I'm just pulling in and out. And so the clue rises up, the distance between the clue and the head shortens, the sail twists and opens up, and the top of the sail spills free and dumps off. So if you want to maximize your horsepower when you're reaching and running, having a second sheet on and moving the lead outboard, assuming you have inboard leads to begin with. Some cruising boats just have the lead on the outboard rail, so you don't have to do anything. That will be a big game changer in terms of making your sail more efficient. It will also allow you to trim your mainsail better, because when you have the jib sheet turning into the mainsail, you over trim the main. If you can open that gap up, then the main gets eased out further. Both sails are more efficient and are pushing the boat forward, and away you go. So experiment with changing your jib lead. I mean, on an offshore passages, you've got the time. You can get a block and a second sheet, or even use the opposite side Genoa sheet and just set up this second lead and share the lead between the two positions, as opposed to trying to sheet from an inboard position. So the last thing to look about in terms of power control on the headstay is headstay sag. And again, if you don't have a backstay adjuster, sorry, you're out of luck. There's nothing you can do here. Your rig tension is going to control your headstay sag tension. And unless you adjust the whole rig tension, you can't move anything. So what you do in that case is you set the rig up so you quite tight, so you're always getting good headstay tension. And just accept the fact that in light air, you're going to be depowering things a little bit. You just have to live with it. But if you have a backstay, you can actually let the headstay sag in light air. And then as it gets breezier and you want to depower it, you can pull on that backstay, which pulls on the headstay, and you can reduce the sag. And that reduces the overall power of things. So, if you sit up in the bow of your boat, this happens to be a very straight headstay. This is a gunboat, a carbon hull and a carbon headstay and everything else. That is a really minimal amount. On most cruising boats, you're going to see a foot or more of headstay sag. There's just no way you can get it out. And we designed that into the sails, so we allow for it. But what sag does is if you had the same starting point with your sail and suddenly you moved it back, you sagged it, well, all that area is now between 2 points that are closer. And so the sail becomes fuller and more powerful. Good in light air, bad in heavy air. So that's what a backstay does. It helps you control headstay sag if you've got one. So here's how we depower the headsail. We keep on top of our halyard tension, right? We add it as the breeze picks up. If we've got a lot of breaking up of the mainsail to keep the boat on its feet, we move the lead aft to twist the sail off and flatten the foot. We've got a backstay adjuster, we tension the headstay. If we're sailing upwind, we're going to feather. We're not going to fight. We're going to sail by angle of heel, as opposed to just the telltales and the perfect, everything looking just right on the sail. When we're reaching, we don't want to feather, right? We want to go where we're headed. And so we don't want to be letting the boat come up, 10 degrees from where we want to go. We want to go straight. So when we're reaching, if we want to depower, our only option is to ease the sheet and unload the boat and allow the boat to go forward. And in the puffs, you'd have to ease. And in the lulls, you'd probably want to trim in to put the power back on. On a racing boat, that's what you're sitting there doing when you're reaching. You're easing in the puffs, trimming in the lulls, easing in the puffs, trimming in the lulls. When you're cruising, you're not going to do that probably, but you're going to find a happy medium that lets the boat stay balanced and keeps it going forward. If you get things over trimmed in a puff, it's just going to overwhelm the self-steering gear and create problems going in a straight line. So this is the sort of depowering sequence for the headsail. As the breeze comes up, here's what we do. Obviously, at some point, we need a smaller headsail. just like we'll need a smaller main, and you can, with most of modern day roller furling head soles, partially furl them. Sail makers make them that way so that they're strong enough. The body of the sail is heavy, the corner patches are oversized. We put things in the luff of the sail to sort of create luff tension, foam, rope, whatever, because you can't add halyard anymore once the sail's partially furled. So you're gonna get those horizontal wrinkles. And this is certainly an okay, quick way to get the right size sail for the conditions. The breeze comes up quickly. This is definitely the right way. Recognize the fact that as you partially furl a sail, the shape also deteriorates because you can't take an airplane wing or a critical airfoil and cut the front third of it off and still have a good airfoil. And so your upwind performance is going to be reduced as you partially furl. There's really no way around that. However, if you're reaching, it doesn't make all that nearly as much difference, and at least you'll have the right size for the job, and so you'll keep the boat on its feet. Ultimately, though, you need to change down. You need a smaller sail, and you need some sort of heavy working jib or things like this. Now, catamarans are a little bit different, particularly displacement catamarans. They already start with some pretty small head soles, and they usually don't have a second head sole. But monohulls and high performance catamarans do. And how big that sail is kind of comes down to, whether your boat is a mainsail driven boat or whether it's a headsail driven boat. The boat on the right, this Passport 40, is a headsail driven boat. If you look at the balance between the fore triangle, the distance between where the headstay attaches and the mast, the J dimension, versus the foot length of the mainsail, the J is significantly longer. And so if you take away the headsail too fast, you're really just kind of, completely making the boat unbalanced. More modern boats are kind of the other way around. They typically have a smaller, usually these days, non-overlapping headsail and a very big mainsail. They are mainsail dependent boats. And usually these smaller jibs don't have to be changed down nearly as quickly. But in the older style boats, having a smaller working jib of some kind is a pretty important component of the equation. And you can obviously go, somewhere you're going to have to get smaller. You might have to talk about a storm sail, things like that. For those of you with classic cutters, that staysail on the inside there is usually quite small. And it's small enough to be your heavy jib. It's usually can be your storm jib on most of the cases, because it's just not very big. But that's something to look at, which is sort of now it's getting really crazy out here. What do I do? A lot of the modern boats actually now have, Solent rigs are common, where you have two headstays like this, and you'll have your kind of working smaller jib on the inside and some sort of big reaching sail, on the outside. Ultimately, you need provisions if you're going offshore seriously for a storm jib, this funny orange triangle on the front of this boat. They are weird sails. They're very specialized. They're very small. We've talked about it in sort of some of our planning, our cruising inventory, about how they're sized and how they're set up and all that stuff. So I'm not going to get into all that again. But this is the way you'll see a lot of hardcore offshore boats set up, with literally 3 furling systems and a big sail, a medium sail, and a tiny sail. And you just push the button or pull the line when that's the one you want. And that's the ultimate way to depower, if you don't want to ever get out of the cockpit. So that's it. Those are the only strings that are on your headsails. They really are not that many. I mean, the sheet, the halyard, the lead position, that's it, right? There's not that much to it. The mainsail has a few more things going on. It's got a sheet. Good chance it's got a traveler, though again, maybe some of the multi-hulls have sort of bridle systems on their main sheet systems as opposed to a traveler. It's probably got a boom bang, though again, multi-hulls maybe not, because they're so wide that the traveler allows the boom to go way out and the main sheet still pulls down. You're going to have a way of getting luff tension. That could be the halyard or maybe even a Cunningham. You might have a preventer on there. You might have a backstay adjuster, and you're certainly going to have some kind of outhaul. So here's the things we need to understand in terms of how they work and how they affect this equation a little bit. And of course, we'll start with the sheet, because the sheet, just like it is on the head sole, is always the most important thing. And it's the thing you adjust first, really. Well, after you get the sail up and get the luff tension adjusted, you turn to the sheet. And as with the head sole, when you're reaching, you let it out to the luffs, and then you trim it back in an inch. And you try to avoid over trimming at all costs. When in doubt, let it go. Look for the sail to start to back wind along the leading edge. Might be hard to see if you have full length battens, but it's there, and you're all set. The trick is what to do when I want to go straight upwind and straight downwind. Straight upwind, we have this critical balance again. Remember, upwind's the hard part. And so sail trim becomes much more difficult and critical, and getting it right has a huge impact on things. We want to basically sheet the main in as hard as we can without stopping the boat and overpowering it. So as I sheet it in, I'm able to sail closer and closer to the wind. I'm forcing the boat to point. I'm pulling it in and pushing the stern away and making the bow turn up into the wind. But if I overdo it, I'll completely stall the flow off the back of the sail, and I won't. The sail will no longer be working properly. So the old rule of thumb is when you're sailing upwind, I'm looking up at the sail, and I'm looking particularly up near the top of the sail, because that's the part that's going to stall first. If I over trim the back part of this sail, that's what's going to stop the boat first. So if I get the top batten basically parallel to the boom, like as in this photo, it's kind of pointed in the same direction, that's a good rule of thumb for sort of maximizing power and pointing when I'm going upwind. This is sort of what it looks like from the top down. If you could see it, you could see this top batten in here basically pointed in the same direction as that boom. And then the other thing is, for maximum power and pointing, the boom will probably be on the center line. So in light air, to get this top batten parallel, I might have to ease and open things up quite a bit, which means I'll pull the traveler up to the booms on the center line. In more breeze, I'll be sheeting harder. I won't need the traveler high to get the boom on the center line. I'll just drop it. Actually, I should amend this here a little bit. This is more a racing boat on the center line thing. Most cruising boats, be very careful with getting the boom too close to the center line. You might start with it down a little bit, because you don't have enough keel underneath there to resist all the sideways force. And so you might find that the boat, you get the water moving past first, and you get that speed first thing going by just having the boom a little down from actually on the center line. And in no cases, I don't think, would you want to get your boom on a cruising boat above the center line. In-mast furling mainsails, a lot of you guys have those. I don't have battens. What do I, how's that top batten going to be parallel to the boom? Well, if I look up at these blue stripes are what are called draft stripes, and they're a handy reference to see what the curvature of the sail looks like, and to see if sort of the top part, the back part of that curve is pointed in the same direction of the boom. The rule is the same, it's just you don't have battens. You have to have some other visual reference so you can figure out what's going on with the leach of your sail. Telltales are also very valuable here. So here's what you were looking at from behind the mainsail. And in the left-hand slide, this sail has a lot of twist. The top of the sail is very, very open by comparison to the bottom. Those battens are pointed way off to leeward there. And you'll also notice that the telltales are flying quite nicely. When you twist a sail, air flows easily, and the telltale works up here, up top. As I start to go fast and the boat's up to speed, I want to see how hard I can point. I can trim harder, and I can trim that leach so the top batten's just parallel to the boom, or you'll start to see that top telltale stall a little bit. If I overdo it, if I pull too hard, all those telltales on the leaches are going to disappear. There's no air flowing off the backside, and I'll have closed off the whole back of the sail. So I want to start with some twist to get flow, trim just to the point where the top batten or the top telltale is stalling. That's a good reference point if you're really honing in and fine tuning. Bottom telltales don't do you much good in a mainsail, because by the time the bottom is stalled, you're so over trimmed, you're not even in the ballpark. So really, you just need telltales up here near the top. That's where they're important. So, twist, this concept of a mainsail opening up and the top being more open than the bottom is a powerful tool. In light to moderate air, we use twist just to get the air flowing off the sail and get the boat going. But when we get in big breeze, we actually twist for control. If I'm overpowered with a boat, one of the quickest ways to depower is to simply ease the main sheet, let the sail twist, let the top of the sail luff, just to keep the boat on its feet. I've exceeded my X amount of power. And so now I'm going to spill it by dumping the top of the mainsail off a little bit. So big trim technique for depowering the boat when you're heeling too much is just to ease the sheet, right? And give away a little bit of that top part power. So you take a look at these race boats. Now, that mainsail is not very pretty there on this right-hand side, or any one of these really. It's completely luffing and ragging out. This is the world champion in the Melges 32 class. That's the way it's supposed to go, right? All he cares is in a puff, is the boat level is on its feet. As you can see on the left-hand slide, you can see even in a big puff where the mainsail's luffing here, the boat is not heeling over any more than 20 degrees, 22 degrees, somewhere in there. Beyond that, it'll develop weather helm. So keeping the boat on its feet, regardless of how much the mainsail luffs, is the key. I don't really care if in the puffs I have to lose most of it. Now, on a cruising boat, I'll say this. If I've got to let the main flog and rag like this all the time to keep the boat upright and on its feet, it's time to reef, right? I've just got too much mainsail up. Overpowered race boats, I can live with this for my 2-mile beat, and then I turn around, set a spinnaker, and I go somewhere else. But on a cruising boat, it's okay to let the main back wind and luff along the leading edge. But if I've got to start letting, 3/4 of the sail luff on a regular basis, I've just got too much sail off and I need to do something else. So the other weird thing about, the main sheet is what happens when I'm trying to really go deep, go dead downwind. And there's a real concern among most sailors that, hey, I can't let the mainsail go all the way out up against the spreaders. Don't worry about it. Sails need to be designed so they can go all the way out. And even before you get dead downwind, the mainsail is going to go further out than you think. It's going to be nearly perpendicular to the boat, except for you multi-hull sailors. You guys have a problem. As you start to let your mainsail out, it runs into your upper shrouds, which are swept way aft because you have no backstay. And it becomes a limiting factor, frankly, in getting downwind. You can't get downwind as effectively because your mainsail is always oversheeted. But on monohulls, it's okay to let the mainsail all the way out, even if it's riding up against the spreaders. The only thing is we really need something to keep the boom from lifting up when it's let all the way out like this. And that thing is the bang. So upwind, my main sheet, I pulled the main all the way in, and now I'm basically pulling down to control the twist and that all those like slides we were just looking at. But as soon as I start to go off the wind and I ease that out and ease it out and ease it out, just like with the jib lead, I'm no longer pulling down anymore. I'm just pulling in and out. And so that lets the boom ride up. The sail twists and opens up. And if it does that too much, well, I lose power for one thing. But I also, the sail actually wants to wrap around the top of the spreader. And that means I can't let it all the way out. So I can let, on a displacement monohull, I can let the boom all the way out against the shrouds as long as I've got the vang on to keep the boom from riding up in the air. And I've got the sail protected from chafe with spreader patches or chafe guards on the batten pockets and things like that. But the vang controls the twist off the wind. And finally, there's the most underappreciated but useful little control on our mainsail, and that's the traveler. The traveler basically positions the boom. So I set the mainsail upwind. I set the mainsail twist with a sheet, right? I pull down, till I just start to close the top off and the top battens parallel to the boom. And then for maximum power and pointing, I put that boom on the center line by pulling the traveler wherever I need to. I don't really care where the traveler car is. I care where the boom is. And for maximum power, and again, as I mentioned, be a little careful of this, pretty darn close to the center line is where you want it for upwind stuff. When I sail off the wind, I basically want to let the main sheet blocks follow the boom so they continue to pull down some, and I let the traveler down when I'm reaching. But the other thing the traveler does in moderate conditions and in heavier conditions is it allows you to fine tune the amount of power in the mainsail. So if it's puffy and I'm heeling over too much and I'm having to fight the helm, if I let the traveler down, that lets the leading edge of the mainsail luff nice and evenly, without the whole sail breaking up. And I can find, the traveler down a foot or two can totally balance the boat out. And suddenly the auto helm's working and I'm keeping the boat on its feet. So the traveler is a good fine-tuned control for sailing in moderate conditions upwind to keep the boat from being overpowered. If it gets windier than that, then I need to get to the sheet. The sheet's the big relief valve. Luff tension is the same as it is with a headsail. Those horizontal wrinkles, I need to get rid of them if I've got them, except for maybe in light air. And I can do it by either pulling up, that's the halyard, or some sails may have a grommet down here at the bottom in a purchase system. It's called a Cunningham. To pull down. They do the same thing. They're just pulling from different directions. But the rule is the same as is with a headsail, and it's something that has to be adjusted with wind velocity. It's not just one position left there and don't touch it. If you have an outhaul, which you probably do, the depth in the lower third of the mainsail can be controlled. So if I let the two corners of the sail come closer together by letting the clew in towards the tack, then the depth of the sail is increased in the bottom part. And that's more power. Good off the wind, good reaching, good maybe even light air upwind, bad when I'm overpowered. So as it starts to get windy, I'm pulling the outhaul on, stretching the foot tight and flat, and depowering the bottom third. If I have a backstay, I might even have another weapon. And that weapon is mass bend. Because when you pull in the backstay, not only am I pulling back on the headstay, I'm actually kind of squashing this whole mast. Imagine a straw that you put on a table and press down on. Well, the middle of that straw is going to bend forward. And as it bends forward, it pulls the luff away from the leech, and you flatten the middle and the upper sections of the sail. It can be a tremendously powerful device if you have a boat that has mass bend. And not all of them do, but at least you should be aware of how it works. It's not complicated. And so you can take a sail that has mass bend from very full and powerful to very, very flat just by, it's almost like putting a reef in just by bending the mast. It is a nice tool to have. So here's how we depower the mainsail. We add halyard tension to control those horizontal wrinkles in the luff. We tension the outhaul to flatten the foot. We tension the backstay if we've got the capability of mass bend to flatten the upper sections of the mainsail. We drop the traveler if we're fine tuning upwind the amount of power we need, or we ease the sheet if we need a big power dump or if we're reaching. The only way to depower on a reach is just like it is with a headsail, is to ease it out. And ideally, if you were depowering on a reach, both sails would be eased. You wouldn't do all of it with one. You let both sails out so they shared the luff evenly, effectively, to keep the boat on its feet. So that's how the mainsail works. This is the point where I say any questions, but you can't hear me, so I'm just going to move on. I'm going to move on to this sort of the ultimate depowering mode for the mainsail, something that you need to learn to do automatically, quickly, and easily, and that is putting in a reef. The sequence goes like this. We start by lowering the halyard. I often have predetermined marks on my halyard just as reference points, but basically if I look forward, I have to lower it enough so I can secure the new tack fitting. This is the simplest way to secure a luff tack fitting. It's a webbing and a stainless steel ring and a hook. This could also be a line up here, whatever. Once the tack is secured, I rehoist the halyard to tension it. I pull the horizontal wrinkles out of the luff. And if my reef is set up properly, I'm pulling down and forward. and I don't really have any tension on that first slide down there. I want to make sure that this strap pulls not just down, but it also pulls forward. That's a critical part of getting your reef set up correctly. It's why single line reefing can be a problem. Because here, as you see in this single line setup, mostly I'm pulling down. I've got very little pulling up, and you can see the sail straining and loading there. And it's also very difficult just to pull the sail flat along the foot and get the flat foot that we want when we're reefed. So if you have single line reefing, you need to think about how to set it up so that there's a forward component to this reef line. And there are some ways to do that in some setups. At the back end, I basically got a line coming out of the outboard end of the boom somewhere, up through my reefing grommet, and then back down to the boom. Most modern boats are loose-footed mainsails, so you're just tying the reef line off around the boom, and the forward section pulls down, and the after section pulls back. Because remember, we're not just pulling down here; pulling back is just as important because we want to flatten the foot out of the sail to keep it as depowered as we can when we're reefed. We want a pancake when we're reefed. And having the sail hanging down like this is not a problem. Having the clew a little off the boom doesn't make any difference at all. We just pull down till we get the foot flat. We don't really care about having this new reef grommet all the way perfectly down to the boom. A matter of fact, if you don't pull it quite all the way down and the sail gets flat, you'll have some room for the sail that you're not using under there. So that's the other important part of securing a reef. And you should be able to reef in, a couple of minutes at most. It should be an automatic thing. Halyard down, new tack secured, retension the halyard, pull on the clew reef till it's all the way in, and then I can resheath the sail and off I go. I don't care about the sail hanging down in the middle. That's really not doing anything. We can take care of that later. And if you got lazy jacks and all that stuff, you don't have to worry about it anyway. Let's talk for the last 5 minutes about off-wind sailing. Recognize the good part of cruising. Most of your time is going to be spent at angles, from 70 degrees on aft, probably 80% of your time. So that's the good news. And you also are going to be spending a lot of that in relatively moderate conditions. 25% of the time the breeze is under 10 knots, 75% it's under 20 knots. So you're going to see a lot of light to moderate off the wind work when you're cruising. And so you need, first of all, the tools to make this happen. A upwind headsail on a furling system is not a very effective sail at the broader angles that you're going to spend a lot of your time at. This is a classic asymmetric cruising style spinnaker. It's got a tack line down here to an anchor roller. It's got a sheet that leads back to the core of the boat, and it's got a spinnaker halyard up here. And in this case, it's got a sock or a snuffer on. This is an important weapon to have. These things, there's the sheet there hanging out right there, and you can see the tack line and all that stuff. These things are great sails for broad reaching and running angles. Downwind sails for cruising boats come in all flavors and sizes, and they're sometimes specialized for multi-hulls. This, as you can see, is a big reaching Genoa, basically, sometimes called a code sail or a code zero or whatever. Those are all marketing terms, but it's a big reaching headsail. So it's much flatter than that asymmetrical. So it's much better at closer angles, but it's not as good at broader angles. And you can do pretty much everything in between. But depending on your boat type and your sail plan and how big your headsail is and all that stuff, a downwind sail is really kind of critical to long offshore passaging because you're going to use it a lot. And here's a multi-hull setup showing an asymmetrical spinnaker tacked to the center line. And you can actually pull the tack of these things over to the weather bow and make them even more efficient on runs. A lot of multi-hulls just leave the main down and just use this sail downwind. Here's a spinnaker sock. This is how you control them. You snuff them and put them out of the way. And once the sock's under control, you can, take the sail down and all that stuff. There's fighting the sock. Um, a lot of the modern push now is towards furlers for these sails. And you can, if the sail is small and flat enough, you can furl the sail. As it gets bigger and wider and more effective at broad reaching and running angles, furling becomes problematic. And so usually once you get over a mid girth of around 80, 85%, all bets are off when it comes to furling a sail. Despite the advances in top-down furlers and all that stuff, which are definitely better, furling is for more specialty reaching sails as opposed to broad reaching and running sails. So the more important thing here, technique-wise, is that a straight line is not always the fastest way to get dead downwind, even though you could. Unlike upwind, if I point dead downwind, I may not go very fast, but at least I can aim where I want to go. And that's not a bad thing. But we need to think a little bit about what our optimum sailing angles are, because when we do go dead downwind, we dramatically decrease the amount of apparent wind, the wind that the sails are seeing. So the boat is basically creating wind coming straight at it. And the breeze, if it's straight behind you, the two are essentially canceling each other out. And so in under 10 knots of breeze, if your boat's going 3, 4, 5 knots, whatever, you're feeling 5, 4 knots apparent, not very much. So if you turn the boat and angle it up to sail at a hotter, closer angle, you instantly start generating apparent wind. And you can tell if you've got any sail up, a reacher or a spinnaker or even a Genoa, as you head up and the apparent wind velocity builds, the sail will start to lift and fill, and you actually get something out of it. It'll be moving the boat. And so typically on most displacement multi-hulls and displacement monohulls, in winds up to about 10 knots or so, it actually pays to tack downwind. Even though you're sailing much greater distances, you get there long before the boat that's just poking their bow straight downwind and just heading right at the mark. So tacking downwind is a powerful concept. It is much more efficient if you have the right tool for the job, that reaching specialty sail of some kind. The magic true wind angle actually is about 140 degrees and under 10 knots. As soon as you get over 10 knots, things change. Suddenly 10 to 14 knots, all of a sudden the boat's going fast enough, it's kind of at its maximum hull speed, that even if it's going 6 or 7 knots, if there's 12 knots, there's still a reasonable amount of apparent wind right behind it. And so you can start going closer to dead downwind once the breeze gets up a little bit over 10 or 12. And at that point, this is where, if you don't want to use some kind of specialty reaching sail, simply pulling out whatever headsail you have becomes very efficient, because now you're in what we refer to as the barn door mode. I just want to have the biggest barn door I can put out there so I can go straight on down. And I really can't do it very well unless I have this pole. The headsail's too unstable without the pole. But if you have the pole and it's set up properly, you can actually sail at a pretty wide range of angles. I mean, you can go almost to lee, which you probably shouldn't do, but you can head up, 30 degrees and still keep the sail full and working. And so once you get over this 10 or 12 knots thing, wing on wing is very effective. Wing on wing can be very effective in heavy air too when you're having control issues. I was chatting with one of the group earlier who just did the transatlantic, and they found they had a small inside self-tacking kind of jib. In heavy air, when it got too windy, they would just pull that sail, well, not pull it out. They would, because it's a catamaran, they would just sheet it out to the other ama, and that became a very, very stable platform. Multi-hulls are good downwind about being stable. That's the beauty of them. Monohulls, once it gets windier, you're going to start to rock and roll a bit. And as the control becomes a problem dead downwind, there's only one simple solution: head up. Don't try to sail dead downwind. Pick a clear, broad-reaching angle where the wind's coming over one side of the boat to control the rocking and rolling that you're getting downwind. So, a couple of things to put on your work list. I want you to go out and practice steering with the sails. best drill we ever did in college is one day a week in practice, we were not allowed to use rudders. We didn't even install them on the boats. So you go out in your 420 with no rudder. And you learn very, very quickly how to control the boat with that. But try it on your bigger boat and it will help when it gets breezy. Try some things that are tricky but can help you learn how to control your boat. Try sailing up to a mooring. Stopping a boat dead in the water under sail at one spot is not easy, but it's a great drill to learn better technique. And it also could be your savior someday if your engine doesn't work, or if you're trying to pick somebody up in the water or something like that. Definitely get your reefing down pat. Do it on a nice 12-knot day in the sunshine. So when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and the squall just came through, it's an automatic. Same thing with partially furling your head sail. How are you, if you're going to use that technique, how are you going to do it? If you're going to have smaller sails, how are you going to set them? Are you going to have an inner force day? Are you going to actually change sails physically on the furling system? Probably not. Think about the things we talked about in terms of depowering full-size sails, making them flatter, twisting them off, moving the leads back, putting the outhaul on, things like that. Figure out what it's going to take to set up a reaching lead. That's going to be a powerful tool for you as you go long distance cruising. And if you've got a whisker pole, what's the technique for deploying that whole thing? Is it stored on the mast? Where's it going to lead? Do you have to have a topping lift? Where does the foreguy go? All that stuff. So sailing, believe it or not, is a lifestyle, but it's also a sport. And so if you do some of these things to practice some of the techniques, it's going to make the lifestyle part of it so much more pleasant. It's going to make you feel better and more in control of your boat as opposed to the other way around. So we're here to help as the official sailmaker to the Salty Dog. We are your personal consultants, and we are non-denominational. If you are working with another sailmaker, I don't care. I'll be happy to offer you my 2 cents on the whole thing. And this is my contact information. The only thing I'd ask is if you want to get in contact with other quantum people, that's great. But if you could do it through me, that would be better, because I can then set it up. If you need a sail check in Newport or wherever, just call me. I'll get it set up for you. They'll be waiting for you. You can meet the people there and all that stuff. But I can help coordinate that and be your facilitator. I'm your one-stop shop for all this stuff. So this is my contact information. I'm available anytime you need help. So that is all I've got for you today. I appreciate your hour plus on that. Sorry to run a little long. And again, if you have questions, call, email, whatever. I can't see your chat room, unfortunately. I might be able to. Hang on, if I stop screen sharing. Escape that. Do I see you? No.
I can read them to you if you'd like.
We may need to do that, because you'd think I should be able to see that. Post attendee Zoom. Yeah. I don't know why I'm not. Where is it? No. Now I'm back to the right screen at least. I'll make that bigger. Reactions, chat. Okay, now I can see it. Let me take it from the top. Got that? So what is your, here's a question, Alex, to everyone. What is your suggestion on the easiest way to jibe an asymmetric? Outside jibe, inside jibe, or use the snubber and move to other side? So there's 2 ways to jibe an asymmetric, actually 3. One is to have the sheets outside of the tack line. And if your asymmetric is tacked directly to the bow, right in front of the headstay, you have to do an outside jibe. You don't have any choice. So that means when you go to jibe, you bear off, you ease the sheet, you let the clew go all the way out in front of the luff of the sail, and you essentially flip the sail inside out on the other side and then pull it in. The danger with this whole outside jibe thing is the sheets want to fall underneath the boat and get caught under the anchor roller and all that stuff. If you have a sprit, Now I've got some, depending how long it is, now I've got some room between the headstay and where the sail is being tacked. And there may be enough room to keep the sheets inside the tack and the headstay. Now I just ease the sheet out till I get to the headstay. I pull it across in between the headstay and the tack, and that's an inside jibe. And the beauty of that is there's no way the sheets can fall in the water, but I have to have enough room in there to do it. In practical reality, what I have found for cruising sailors who are doing long distance cruising anyway, where the jibe might be, let's see, it's noon. I think we'll jibe at 4 this afternoon. That should, put us about where we want to be. I just snuff the thing in a sock or furl it and bring it around and undo it on the other side. That's foolproof. You're never going to get the sail fouled around the headstay. You're never going to get the sheets underneath the boat. So the downside risks are all not there. So that's the way I would set it up. Let's see here. Oh, this is from Hank, and this is a good one. Thank you, Hank. So under what conditions do you depower versus reefing? Well, I depower first. I get the sails as flat as I can, right? The least amount of power, all my outhaul and my halyard tension and my lead back and all that stuff. But then if I'm still heeling and I got too much helm, I've got to do something else. And like I've probably, by this point, I've begun to ease the sheet, particularly the main sheet, to just keep the boat on its feet. And when it's luffing more than 40 or 50% of the way all the time to keep the boat on its feet and keep it under control, I need to reef. That's a sure sign. Mainsail luffing on the whole thing. And whether you reef first or go to a smaller headsail is sort of boat dependent question, but reefing is certainly a lot quicker and easier. All right, mostly a multi-hull question. Due to mainsail being limited by the shrouds, we often run twin headsails wing on wing. We sail to a reefing chart provided by the manufacturer, but it does not include the Genoa Code 0 or Code 0 Plus spinnaker. Is it reasonable to sail up to main and spinnaker limit with Code 0 and spinnaker, or main and Code 0 limit? Wow. Not sure I entirely grasp this here, but it all depends. Again, a Code 0 is a variable item. It does not describe one sail. The design window for a Code 0 covers a range of sizes that's big. And also, you don't know what it's made out of, how strong it is. But a lot of boats, multi-hulls that we build sails for, the Code 0 or the reaching specialty sail is the primary sail. It's what you use all the time. And it, typically, you'd use it until you started to feel like you're getting out of control with a full main at reaching angles. So I think you can sail up to the main and spinnaker limit with a Code 0 if it's depending on its sizing and depending upon its construction and then what the materials were made of. I didn't do a very good job of answering that one for you. Maybe we can get together and I can talk more about your specific boats and things like that. Very good. I often raise the traveler to depower my main, twisting off the top. This is frequently confused people who are strictly trained to drop the traveler. Yes, it confuses me too, Fred. I would never raise the traveler to depower the sail. If I wanted to twist the top of the sail, I would simply ease the vang or the main sheet to let the boom rise up and twist the top. If I pull the bottom in, I'm powering the bottom up just to twist the top off. So I'm doing two opposite things. I'm putting power in the bottom to try to depower the top. Better off to just go ahead and drop the traveler and or ease the main sheet or vang to let the sail open up. So I wouldn't pull the traveler up to depower. That's sort of, you're fighting yourself in that. Okay, when sailing downwind, is it effective to just use a 130 Genoa? Sure, the main's down. There's nothing in the way of the Genoa, and the thing will actually, get air to it and work. So that's certainly one way to depower and keep things under control. And lots of people do that. So that's what I saw for quick questions here. Did I miss anything? Okay. So
David, I see one more question here that I think you did miss. From Matt. He says, on a catamaran using an asymmetric only reaching, is the boat built for these stresses? better balance with the main, better filling the asymmetrical without the main.
Gotcha. So I think it's fine to use the asymmetric without the main, and many people do. And the boat, if the boat can't handle those stresses, then something's wrong with the way the boat was designed and built, because that should not, you shouldn't need a mainsail to be able to carry an asymmetrical forward. And the nice thing about having the mainsail down is, again, is it makes that asymmetrical much more effective. It gets it out of that whole blanketing effect. And so that is a common technique in multi-hulls for sure, especially if you want to sail at deeper angles on the whole thing.
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I think the other comments were thank you, and thank you. This is a
Good,
really great,
good.
great discussion.
I
think
enjoyed
we-
being with you guys, and hope you'll have me back.
Yeah, plan to, and I hope everybody will take advantage and reach out to Dave and the Quantum team for assistance. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Barb.
All right. Well, looks like no more questions. Thanks again, Dave, for joining us today and sharing that great information. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting.
Great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me.
See you next time.
Okay.